Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome to our 34th episode of Coffee Talk Live. Today we are talking about veganism, plant-based eating, and what the heck it has to do with living a healthy lifestyle. I am Connie Pastorius, host of Coffee Talk Live and the showrunner here in Strong as a Mother, Happy and Healthy Living, which is the village for moms to feel heard and supported so they can raise healthy and happy babies while living a healthy and happy life. I'm also in charge of the Strong as a Mother coaching program from Pastorius Fitness, which is online coaching for moms who are ready to get strong, gain energy, and reclaim their health. So, having said all that, let's talk about today's episode. I am so excited about this show today because I love learning things from people who know way more than I do about it. And that's pretty much the premise of my entire talk show. But today's guest is super duper cool. She has, I'm a bit of a fangirl, but this girl has written 4 books, writes for magazines like Alive Magazine and Veg News, and hosts the popular No Bullshit Vegan podcast. And most importantly, her team and she helps clients worldwide transition to veganism, ensure their nutrition supports their fitness and physique goals, and get super strong. So please welcome to the show, Karina Inkster. Welcome, Karina.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Connie. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And you could probably tell that I took that intro from your website, which was it was spot on. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to copy paste this right into my show today. So we have a lot to talk about because you know so much about this world that I know so little of, admittedly. And I really want to get right into the conversation. But before we go anywhere, I want to know what is in your cup today.
I have my usual decaf black tea with soy milk. I don't do caffeine because I have anxiety. So I have like 4 of these giant mugs every day full of tea. And it's decaf. So yeah, kind of boring, but delicious.
There's nothing boring about a hot beverage that makes you happy. And I have anxiety too, but I'm also apparently in denial about caffeine having anything to do with it. So I've got full calf La Colombe coffee, which is, it was originally roasted and created by this dude, Todd Carmichael, who was like the Indiana Jones of coffee exploration. But now Chobani owns it, but it's still delicious. And I still drink cow milk. So I got my pumpkin spice creamer, as you can tell a little bit. I am in pumpkin season because September 1 hits. And I think that's my green light for everything pumpkin related. What about you? Do you get into the fall season with pumpkin and spices?
Pumpkin spice, not so much. Never really been a fan for whatever reason, but chai tea though, which is kind of similar. I'm on board with that, like homemade with the whole spices. Yeah, yes. 100%.
You know, when I was in India, I spent 3 months there for yoga training, and I stayed in a spare room of a family who like knew 0 English. I knew 0 Hindi, but she still made the most amazing masala chai tea for me every single morning. And I still have never had anything quite as good. And I agree. The spices are similar, but it doesn't have that.
I believe it.
Yeah. Good. It's good. So I'm going to take a sip and we're going to start talking. Karina, where do you even like to start when we talk about vegan diets, veganism, and your personal journey? I mean, I feel like we need to get to know you a little bit and understand where you're coming from and where all your expertise comes from. So how did you get into it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't want to bore people with the extremely long version, but you know, people come to veganism for all sorts of reasons. these days I feel like it's very often to do with the environment and the climate emergency and how animal agriculture contributes to those things. But my journey started when I was 11, which was a long time ago, when I went vegetarian first. And that was entirely for ethical reasons. But back then, we didn't have social media, we didn't have easy internet access. So it took me 5 years to realize that the dairy and the egg and the meat industries are all interchangeable. They're one and the same. They're not morally distinguishable from each other. I mean, if you eat eggs, you're supporting the chicken meat industry. And if you drink milk, you're supporting the veal industry because, you know, pregnant cows make milk and babies are turned into veal. So like, you know, they're one and the same. It just took me that long to realize. But when I did, I went vegan when I was 16, almost 20 years ago. And since then, it's been a full journey of adding reasons, if that makes sense. So at first, it was just an ethical decision, moral decision, but now it's a health decision. It's an environmental decision. It's one about fellow humans on our planet and famine and all of those kind of major issues, food security. So it's basically just ballooned in those almost 2 decades. But folks now are coming to it from all sorts of reasons, including, by the way, athletic performance. So there are some pro athletes who are going plant-based just for performance reasons because they can train harder, they can recover faster. Some folks who are watching may have seen the Game Changers documentary, which was like, you know, blowing up the plant-based athleticism scene, basically. So yeah, basically for me, it started with ethics and reasons have been added since then.
I really love that idea of like adding reasons because so fun fact about me, I was guilted / scared into being a vegetarian during my undergrad because my friend who was a raw fooditarian gave me this book. She's like, you have to read this. It's called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. And it was like a fear-based method, slightly informational, but like it scared the hell out of me and guilted the hell out of me. Like, how could I possibly be doing this and contributing to this? Like, if these stories are anywhere near real, like I can't possibly. But so with that reason alone, I became a vegetarian, but I didn't know what the hell to do. And I was in undergrad for health science, but like we don't talk about plant-based nutrition in exercise science, not in 2010. And I ended up gaining a lot of weight, eating a ton of pasta and just being miserable all the time. So I made my peace with animals, but like, since that was the only reason at the time, like it wasn't a good enough reason to stay there. So you're talking about like continuing to reinforce why this is the path you wanted to take. I think that's really, I think that's a really great way to just continue feeling good about the choices that you're making, believing that it's the right thing to do. And I think for a lot of people who are looking to even take that similar idea into exercise, like you know about, you know, the behavior change spectrum and why you might start at one place mentally about why you want to exercise. But if you keep building on reasons like, oh, I'm doing this because, you know, I want to be there for my family. I want to do this because it's starting to make me feel better. I'm doing this because I want to live longer, blah, blah, blah. Like continuing to add those reasons it's a really cool way to keep the habit, keep the behavior that you want to do. So coming back to becoming vegan, you know, vegetarianism, vegan, pescatarian, all the isms. Let's talk about what defines a vegan.
Good question and good idea to start there. So vegans don't eat or use any sort of animal products. And so by eat or use, I mean consume in our food, but also use in our day-to-day life. So we don't use leather or wool. We make sure that our cosmetics are not tested on animals and don't include animal ingredients. So it's basically as far as is practical and possible, which is part of the official definition of veganism from the Vegan Society in the UK. We don't use animal products and we use plant-based products instead for both food and life.
Do you find that hard to do? Hard to like confirm like the supplement you're taking or the products that you're using is hard or easy nowadays to determine, like, is this actually vegan or not?
It was hard 18 years ago. Now it's really easy. So at first, they didn't have vegan labels. You know, we now have so many labels like gluten-free, vegan, you know, whatever else, allergen-free. We never had those when I first started. So not every item that's vegan has a vegan stamp on it, obviously, but it's way easier now. You can quickly Google search something. You couldn't do that back in the day. So especially living where I do, which is BC in Canada, West Coast, we're very like vegan friendly as it is. So I realize and I acknowledge that this changes from place to place, and in some places in the world it's more difficult, and some cultures in the world it's more difficult. So, you know, I'm speaking from a very privileged situation, privileged context here, and I do find it easy. I live in a tiny little town. There's only 13,000 people here, and it's easy to be vegan here. I mean, there's a grocery store that a friend of mine runs that's entirely vegan, like not just produce, but like a full grocery store in a town this small that's vegan. So it's pretty easy nowadays.
That's really, I mean, that's really encouraging to start with, because similarly, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with celiac disease shortly before I met my husband. So maybe like 12 years ago. And back then there was like one store, but you had to drive way out to get the very specialty gluten-free items. So I'm too noticing that like it's becoming easier and more readily available. Same with like organic items, certified organic items, even like at the beginning of our coaching careers, which I believe is fairly similar back in like 2010-ish. It was fairly expensive and exotic to acquire organic produce and meat especially, but now you can buy it in bulk at Costco. So one thing in particular that you know, people always come up and ask, and I'm sure they ask you all the time, is what about the protein, bro? Like how do we know we are getting, if we're going into veganism, if we're cutting all the meats out, how do we eat enough protein? And personally speaking, like I came from a meat and potatoes family where the meat is the star of the show and there's always something on the plate, and then everything else is some shade of brown. And then if there's a salad, it's drowning in ranch dressing. So if there's people like me out there that's like, how do you even make a plate of food without meat on it? How can I possibly get enough if I'm cutting it out of my diet altogether?
Really good question. And vegans are asked that basically on a daily basis. So here's the thing. We don't want to look at the transition to going vegan as cutting things out. If all you're doing is cutting out animal products, yeah, you're probably not going to get enough protein. I'm going to say it right now, especially if you're strength training. So the average person who is sedentary, you don't need to worry about protein. I think part of the issue here is protein just being put on a pedestal like it's the only macronutrient we ever need. And so there is some myth busting that has to be done around protein itself, whether we're talking about veganism or not. The average person doesn't have to worry about eating enough protein. Now, if you have serious training goals or body composition goals, yeah, you're going to need to think about protein if you're vegan or not. So if you are vegan, or if you're making the transition to veganism, you want to think about adding plant-based foods to your plate rather than just like removing things and avoiding things, right? It's about abundance. It's not about avoidance. So when you start adding plant-based items, so we're talking legumes, we're talking tempeh, tofu, seitan, nutritional yeast, all of these things I honestly didn't even know about before I went vegan. You're automatically crowding out the the animal-based ingredients on your plate, which is kind of the point, right? You don't just want to delete things and then eat rice and some broccoli. Like that's not going to work. So part of it is this mindset around abundance and like hey, how many plant-based foods can I cram onto my plate, and how many new items can I try that I've never tried before? And part of it is bullshit busting around protein, and you probably don't need as much as you think. And the fact that all foods have protein and amino acids in them. That's another piece of it.
Right. So this idea of abundance is really freaking cool because every diet and diet culture talks about cutting out, eliminate bread, eliminate dairy, eliminate, I don't know, everything. And you're talking about adding in, and the idea of just being allowed, being given permission to eat more stuff. And, yeah, you're right. If there's a steak on my plate, I'm not going to have even the appetite to also have like a mixed bean salad and, green beans and but taking the meat off the plate and gives us the opportunity to replace it with so much more cool stuff. And, for people who like to cook.
Coach Zoe always says, if you think about it, you got like maybe 8 options for really good protein when it comes to animal products. But in the vegan world, you have like 50. So it really is about abundance.
Ooh, let's talk about those proteins. Not all 50 of them, but let's start with the common ones. Tofu, tempeh, seitan, which I swear I'm never ever pronouncing right.
No, that's right, seitan.
Seitan. It sounds like what I don't think it should be, what I think it should be. Impossible meat and the rise of fake or artificial. I don't want to say the wrong words here, but like, can we talk a little bit about these weird textured things that carnivores might be slightly averted to in the beginning? What the hell are they made out of, and why do we want to start integrating them into our meals?
Good question. So I call them plant-based meats. They're not faux meats or fake meats. I mean, nuts have meat, right? A coconut has meat. So it's not fake, it's just plant-based meat. These are not things that are like whole foods. So we don't want all of our protein to be coming from plant-based meats. Now, is there anything inherently wrong with plant-based meats? No. They're just higher processed foods. They usually have more sodium and more fat, sometimes saturated fat from coconut oil, for example. So very often they're made from soy. Other times they're made from seitan, which is based on wheat. It's basically just the protein in wheat. So if you have celiac, unfortunately, that is the worst case scenario because it's all gluten. It is delicious though. Something like the Beyond Burger is made entirely of pea protein. So it's soy-free and it's gluten-free. So these are just one option. And a lot of folks, myself included, look at these as kind of transition foods. So if you're somebody who is meat and potatoes background, for example, and you just want to switch out some of those foods for easy plant-based options, just have a plant-based burger if that's what you're used to, while you're incorporating some other foods. So they're really high in protein. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. We just don't want to get all of our protein from those sources. Like anything though, I mean, it's all about moderation, which sounds really boring and is not going to sell millions of dollars worth of diet books, I realize, but in everything, it's all about moderation. So we've got lots of other options. We have the entire world of nuts and seeds, hemp hearts, chia seeds, flax seeds, all of our nuts. And yes, I realize that some of these items also include other macronutrients. It's not just protein, but that's kind of the point of a well-rounded diet, right? So we have seitan, we've already mentioned, which is wheat-based. We have all of our kind of soy fermented products like tempeh and tofu and miso. And we have things like legumes. Soybeans, edamame, are a complete protein. So, go to your Japanese restaurant or make your own fresh edamame. You can get them dry roasted as well. 50% of the calories you're getting from dry roasted edamame come straight from protein. So there's a lot of different options.
Yeah, and edamames happen to be one of my daughter's favorite foods. She loves crunching on like the salted roasted ones, so it's a great snack for her. But also the activity of taking the salted whole edamame and like getting the noodles out, like she loves that to the point where like snow peas confuses her because she's like, I'm not supposed to eat the outside. Like, what am I doing?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So you said fermented in place of what I thought would be processed. So the difference between fermented and processed, is there a big difference with tofu, seitan, all in those items?
Okay, so processed does not have an official definition. Fermented does. Technically, quinoa is processed because you have to take the outer husk of it off and like process it so you can eat it, right? So, I mean, this is a whole other conversation. We actually did an entire podcast episode just about processed and what does it mean. It has been vilified. It is like a buzzword and it does not mean anything. It does not have a definition. So what we're usually talking about when we talk about processed is like highly processed foods that include things like white sugar and a shitload of sodium, right? So, when we're talking about processed, just keep in mind it doesn't have a definition. So technically your dry roasted edamame, which has one ingredient, is processed because they had to like go through a process to create them, right? So fermented is a specific process whereby you have like microorganisms that are involved in creating the food. So things like tofu and tempeh, they're not on my avoid list. I actually don't have an avoid list, but if I did, they wouldn't be on it. Because they're so close to their original ingredient, especially tempeh, by the way. It goes through fewer steps than tofu. So they are whole proteins. They've been eaten in some cultures for thousands and thousands of years, including seitan, by the way, which was created by Buddhist monks thousands of years ago because they don't eat any animal products either. So these things are fantastic protein sources. They're delicious. They're super versatile. And they, barring any sort of like intolerance or allergy, which I have a lot of as well. I'm kind of an allergy medical case. Barring those things, they should be part of every vegan's standard diet.
That's great. And I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I assumed that all of those weird textured items that weren't typical, like didn't grow in the ground organically, like by itself, or didn't come from an animal, was just like weird. So it's really cool to understand that like seitan is the part of the wheat that my mother-in-law can't have. So when you split it, there it is, and you can still eat it. And you said it was some of these things are like transition foods, which I think is brilliant because we're not all magical professional chefs that can start creating these amazing recipes that don't have any of these fermented foods. So I really like that, and it really triggered my I don't want to call it PTSD, but during that vegetarian phase in my life, I was eating a ton of Morningstar meatballs, Morningstar breakfast patties. Right. That's all that was there, and then I tried some weird variations of like what it wasn't bacon, but all those not real. Trying to be, sorry, not real, but just trying to be something that it just quite wasn't. Anyways, you talked about seeds, you talked about nuts. A lot of, I feel like the initial response is like, that stuff's expensive, especially the organic. So let's talk about the myth about being vegan is expensive as hell.
Any diet can be expensive as hell, depending on where you're purchasing things, what you're purchasing. Look, when it comes down to it, how expensive are bulk rice and beans? I mean, that could be the basis of a well-rounded vegan diet. Produce, rice, beans, tofu. So I think nowadays, because we have so many options, like a lot of these, more processed plant-based meats, for example, which by the way have come a long way. Like 15 years ago, they were all gross and not worth your time. Now we have tons of options. They're amazing. Anyways, those things are all definitely more expensive. And when it comes down to it, you can get produce and bulk pulses and grains pretty much anywhere, whether you're vegan or not. Again, acknowledging the existence of food deserts, the existence of poverty, lots of issues here are at play. But when it comes down to it, your bulk grains, your bulk legumes, which are a protein source, of course, are not going to set you back a ton. And I think it's just the inclusion of a lot of these, like, you know, plant-based cheeses that you're going to put on your amazing platter, you know, and your Beyond Burgers and your Impossible Burgers, which are pretty pricey, actually. Just the fact that they exist makes folks think that all of veganism is expensive when it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, if anybody actually ever sat down and calculated out how much they're spending on meat, I know, like, as a meat eater at the moment, like, organic chicken is rising in price, organic ground beef is rising in price. So like, if you're eating meat and you want to eat organic, like, it ain't cheap. And, you know, what a lot of moms are dealing with is their kids who just want to eat chicken nuggets all the time. And I know we didn't put this on like our list of notes, but do you have any anecdotal or advice for how to just like slowly introduce a more plant-based lifestyle to people in your family who are not exactly on board just yet?
Okay, so we've done entire podcast episodes with experts who are parents. I'm not a parent, but
You're a cat
who
parent.
actually, I'm a cat parent. Yeah, as you can tell from my shirt. Little obsessed. But yeah, so just FYI, if folks want to check out the podcast, we have a recent one that's all about, we have Sophia from Veggies Don't Bite, about how to transition your family. But really what it comes down to is a couple things. First of all is expectation management. So don't expect your whole family to be on board 100% doing a 180 of their diet overnight. It's not going to work. Whether it's veganism or anything else, a diet change is pretty major. So there's an expectation management piece. And then there's also a piece that involves the family members. So it generally works better if you involve your kids in the whole process. If they're not already involved in like choosing produce at the store, or, hey, can you help me stir this, you know, batter for the breakfast muffins we're making, or whatever it is. Some level of involvement from your kids or your other family members is what we found works really well in our clients who have older kids. Often they're the ones who are choosing the plant-based menus that they want to try. Like, hey, I came across a recipe. We have one client who has 3 teenagers who are currently making the transition. And like anything, some recipes are a hit, some are not. And the kids are all involved in choosing what those recipes are going to be and making them. But nowadays, like you mentioned, chicken nuggets, right? You can get pretty legit plant-based nuggets that taste pretty much the same. I mean, A&W here, which is a huge chain, like fast food chain, has plant-based, quote, chicken nuggets. You really can't tell the difference. So that's also a part of it, is using some of these transition foods in the process, but also trying to get folks to open up to other options.
That's great. And honestly, like, some adults are just as stubborn or resistant to change as as children are. And I love every one of them, I swear. But this overarching kind of like period of exploration, right? If anybody's read James Clear, Atomic Habits, he recommends having this period of exploration where you just try new stuff, try stuff that you haven't done before. If you want to try a new workout, try a new, bedtime activity, trying a new eating lifestyle, and knowing that you're not going to like hit the nail on the head from the first step, from the first moment, and allowing yourself to just see, like, are these chicken nugget alternatives delicious? Are they disgusting? Should I try it in a different path? Would just be eating vegan before 6 p.m. like Mark Bittman did. Is that something that I could manage? Or just trusting that there's a trial and error period and you can still get there, which I'm sure you know as a coach too, that what a lot of people do as older adults is expect to get it right the first time. And if they don't, they quit because they forget what it's like to be new at something.
Exactly.
So this is a very big adjustment. And I think, personally, as an athlete, I'm training for the New York City Marathon right now. And I, a few months ago, got diagnosed with arthritis in my neck and my cervical spine equivalent to like an 80-year-old. I don't know
Wow.
how, I don't know. But that's what it was. I saw the MRI and it was just like, it was terrifying. But before I went into some invasive procedures, I tried to go a more plant-based diet and decrease the inflammatory foods that I was eating, which was mostly red meat and some processed sugar items. So I, whether it was a placebo effect or not, but I felt the difference. The pain was decreasing. Sometimes I didn't feel pain at all. And I was like, oh shit, there actually is something to this. And I mean, you can tell, you can feel it. And I think when people go into these sort of changes in their diet, if they're willing to pay attention and notice how they're feeling, how their digestion is, how their moods are affected by cultivating a more positive relationship with whole foods based items, that it's really beneficial. And we can stand on our soapbox too about the long-term cost benefits of not having ailments or injuries or illnesses based on eating inflammatory type foods like animal products. So I think this is a really nice this was a really helpful understanding of like, the basics of a vegan lifestyle and vegan diet. And there was a question from somebody in the group who I do want to get to. They asked best sources of protein from those Beyond Meat products or tofu, and whether you know anything about the FODMAP diet and detox headaches. Did any of these things really, did you have any thoughts towards this? I mean, I know we already talked a little bit about getting protein sources from foods like, well, everything, but yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we've covered the protein aspect. We do have a grocery list. It's not like something you print off and take to the grocery store. It's like an inspiration list. It has 350 vegan items on it, which is like 1% of the foods you can eat as somebody who's plant-based. But just for folks, if they want to go in there and look at, protein options, produce options, things that they may not have tried before, it's on our website. You can just download it for free. But the FODMAP thing, I'm not a huge expert on FODMAP. My grandma actually had celiac back in the day, so I've done a lot of gluten-free kind of things. FODMAP, I mean, that needs to be done with a medical team. And there needs to be some kind of a back and forth, when people eliminate a whole bunch of foods and then bring back foods. Generally, it's done for things like IBS, or other digestive issues where we're trying to figure out what is causing digestive problems. But, there's certain things in the vegan diet and in the omnivore diet that are not going to work on a FODMAP diet. So things like onions, garlic, things like artichokes. But then there are a lot of things on the vegan diet like rice and your nightshades, eggplants, that kind of stuff that are totally fine on the FODMAP diet. So I think it's really just about each individual working with their medical team, right? It's possible. We have a client right now who's trying to figure out her IBS. She's been vegan for years and she's on an official FODMAP diet, but she's working with a registered dietitian and her doctor. So I would just throw that out there. Make sure you're doing it with supervision from a qualified professional. and
not Goop or Google.
Or Google. Yeah, exactly. And then the detox headache thing. Let's just get one thing straight. Detox is not a thing. That's not how our physiology works. So I understand that the question is about more like the transition itself, and maybe there's, some changes happening when you change your diet. So I'm no expert on that either. I can just tell you that detox in any way, shape, or form is not a thing. Our bodies have livers and kidneys. They do not shed extra things when we change our diets or do a cleanse or whatever. But what might be happening is just a response to a really fast change in diet. So some folks go vegan literally overnight. And for a lot of people it works. Generally, I would recommend a more gradual approach, because you're kind of going to shock your system, especially if you're used to eating a lot of animal products, right? If you're coming from a more meat and potatoes background, that's a shock to the system, and you're probably going to notice some things like headaches and like digestive issues. Apparently only 3% of folks in Canada and the States get enough fiber. And if you're overnight changing your diet to a vegan diet, now you're getting a shitload more fiber, closer to what you need. Shitload, no pun intended.
I heard
and right? That can affect things, you know? So I would say if you're noticing things that don't feel great, take it slower. Like do it meal by meal, right? Veganize your breakfast, leave it there for a couple weeks, and then veganize your lunch, leave it there for a couple weeks. So it's really more about the like shock to the system than it is about detoxing.
I agree. And thank you for once again advocating for stop using the word detox. But it's not, I mean, it's not anybody's fault. It's just an overused word in our industry. And people like you and me are just gently trying to remind people that we have body parts that do that for us.
Exactly.
So, I want to talk for a minute real quick about one of your many books that I had only started to scratch the surface. It's been hanging out here in the background of today's conversation, The Vegan Athlete. This thing is no joke. And you can actually see, I was going to say, like half of this book is educational, science and evidence-based information about living a plant-based lifestyle, which is absolutely amazing. And because one thing I love to learn or love to do is to understand the why and make sure that I'm not reading some voodoo Dr. Google type information. So this is a complete guide to a healthy plant-based active lifestyle, which is just in line with the way I coach too. It's not just the diet, it's not just the exercise, but these kinds of books allows you to learn how to integrate, moderate exercise and moderate veganism until you're ready to take it the next step up. So this is available on Amazon, which is where I got it from. Is it available anywhere else for anti-Amazon people?
It is, yes. There are independent bookstores. You could go to your local bookstore. It just came out, so it should be pretty much everywhere.
Nice. Yes, it is really cool. Beautiful pictures. I love a good picture. You have exercise. You have workout plans in here, very basic ones, which I like, simple explanations of the exercises. Like I said, information. And the one thing I wanted to ask about this book, which I really appreciated, was why you didn't include the nutrition facts on your recipes. I really like that. Because I am not neurotic and I encourage people not to be neurotic, but I want to hear if there was a reason why you didn't do it as well.
That's a great question, and that is exactly the reason. So in our work with clients, we realize that folks are coming from all sorts of backgrounds, and in many cases, tracking things like calories, protein, carbs, fats is actually triggering for various reasons. Some folks come from a background of disordered eating behaviors or full-on eating disorders. We also want to focus on the act of eating itself and not eating for a specific goal. Like, oh, I need to get 20 grams of protein. What am I going to eat that's going to get me that? Like, yeah, you got to think about these things in the background, especially if you have high-level training goals. But if you're looking through a cookbook based on the calories and the carb count, that's not really what we were going for. These recipes are all made for active folks anyway, so they're going to be higher in protein. You need your carbs to fuel your workouts, which are kind of inherent in the plant-based diet anyways. So yeah, it's kind of that reasoning. Like, yeah, sure, we have some clients who love tracking in MyFitnessPal or whatever app they're using to see those pieces of information. But for other folks, it's triggering, it is not psychologically healthy, and it leads to this negative spiral where they're not eating for enjoyment anymore.
Right. And as this whole conversation, this whole show is about living sustainably healthy lifestyle is, can you possibly track your macros and micros every single day for the rest of your life? I am not going to be on my deathbed grateful that I did that my whole life. So
good way of putting it.
So, yeah, the recipes look amazing. A lot of ethnically inspired foods, a lot of just straight up like this is a recipe for pizza and everything in between. I think it's a really awesome tool to have in your toolbox, even if you don't, even if you're not ready to go vegan. I think that talking to people who have lived an entirely plant-based lifestyle for a very long time is the exact kind of person you want to talk to if you just want to eat more plant-based foods in general, and then just see what happens, you know?
Exactly.
So to wrap up this, what is one piece of advice, one first single step you think a mom or a person listening could take to start to integrate a little bit more about what we talked about today?
Good question. I think I would go back to what we talked about before, which is the mindset piece. I know it sounds kind of cliche, you know, talking about mindset, but it's important. And we need to keep in mind the abundance versus avoidance. And so if you have a mindset of exactly what you were mentioning, Connie, like in James Clear's work around a period of experimentation, a period of trying things, that's about abundance. That's about adding things to your life, not subtracting things. So, you know, go to the grocery store, maybe pick up a new produce item that you haven't tried before. There's a lot of like weird and wonderful veggies you may not have tried. A lot of folks have not tried like daikon radish or, you know, some of those items that might not be part of your current diet. So I think it's really just about keeping in mind, it's about expanding your plate and your food options and your recipe options, not just about deleting things from your current diet.
That's beautiful and I think it's a great first step. You go pick out some vegetable, let your kid pick out some vegetable or your partner, and just make a meal around it. Do some Googling for recipes.
You're going to need to do some Googling probably, yeah. But that's part of the fun.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. So cheers, my friend. This was such a great conversation. I feel like I learned so much. Everybody who's listening, please grab a copy of Karina's new Vegan Athlete book. She also has a website, karinainkster.com, and listen to her No Bullshit podcast, her No Bullshit Vegan podcast, and learn some new stuff about what it really feels like and is like to live a vegan life. So for everybody watching, thank you for joining me. If you are watching this as a YouTube replay, please like, share, and subscribe so I know you want to keep getting more information like this. And if you're in the group, please post your questions below. If you have feedback, thoughts, or ideas, or anything you would want to know more about, I can connect you right to Karina, and I'm sure she would love to share what she knows. So until next week, stay strong, stay caffeinated or decaffeinated, and I will see you all in the group. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Karina.
Thanks for having me.